Well, yeah, frame it and move on. Now, I've been in college and then we got for a couple years.
Counterpart, almost counterpart plans.
Well, nice talking to you. At least one of our regular attendees actually.
Pre-ring, they can just see how much the
Anyway, again, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the museum for allowing us to hold the event here tonight. During the months of January, February, and March, this town and a couple of other little towns in the foothills areas get together and we honor our first responders, and that's firefighters, EMS, EMTs, law enforcement, peace officers, sheriffs,
and our military.
and the military, current and former. Anyway, so the one thing I forgot to do is introduce myself. My name is Peter. I'm the current president of the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce sponsors the Hero Appreciation Month event. And now that I have bored you all to tears, let me introduce you to the person who actually runs the event, Leilani.
Oh. Hi, I'm Leah. My husband and I started the Heroes program, and we're really thrilled that the Chamber lets us do it under the auspices of the Chamber. Now, tonight, we're going to start off with our Firefighter celebration. And Peter's trying to set up the video. Okay, and our first honoree of the night, Deborah Schweitzer. Come on, Deborah. Now, I asked Colleen, is somebody going to be here to tell us a little bit about your background? Because I don't know if you'll talk about yourself. Would you like to come up and...
Sure.
Yes,
No,
please.
it'd be
And only tell us the good stuff.
pleasure,
I
and
know.
I do not want to take away from Deb's presentation,
Oh,
but
no, just...
Deb started and worked up the ladder in the park service, and where she started was, let's just say, down here, and I believe it was at the Wani Hotel.
That's not down
Or
Yeah,
that might be up here.
yeah.
But she started as concessions in Yosemite, and she's worked her way up to when she was working with us, the public affairs officer for fire management. And she did such a good job, the Forest Service stealed her away from us.
Oh, boy.
So she's an alumni currently of Sequoia Kings, and she's done a lot for the fire program and a lot for the community. In our fire program, whenever we have a response, it's a collaboration with CAL FIRE and the county. Joe Garcia's back there, and the community. There's fire operations involved, there's the fire ecologist who's sitting there, and the chief ranger who's sitting there. But Deb is the portal for the community to be involved and collaborate with us in the fire response. And Deb took that role very seriously. So she was an advocate for the community of Three Rivers when we were determining our strategy on fires, or if Ben was going to light a burn or not. So Ben, she is very neutral, and she advocated strong for the community and made sure that when we made decisions, strategic decisions, the community was represented. And she was as much of a community member as an employee in the park. So
I remember smoke, we'd go, Deborah, what is this? Too much smoke. We can't breathe. Right,
Yeah,
she
that's-
got everything.
Three River, the last thing I'll say, it's a special place to live. There's the river, there's sequoia trees, but part of the trade-off is we live in a fire-adapted ecosystem, and so it's just a matter of fact that we're going to have to deal with smoke, and so there's a lot of trade-offs, and Deb helped us make those decisions. So I've talked too much. So
Well
Oh,
said.
no, thank you
Yeah.
very
Well
much.
All right,
Well, and Lee asked me if I'd be willing to give a little bit of a presentation about fire and smoke from an interagency perspective now that I actually have one. Is there a way we can dim those lights a smidgen?
Yeah. Just turn them off.
And so I'm coming to you with the two, both the Forest Service Shield and the Park Service Arrowhead. And I'm currently the Public Affairs Officer for the Inyo National Forest. So I really did just go across the mountains. But I'm here mostly, I think, on behalf of Sequoia and Kings Canyon talking about what I did here in the parks. And I want to talk about a couple things, but I've always had a fascination about the human relationship with fire. So I'm going to start with that, go through it really briefly. I'm going to talk a little bit about why the agencies do things different sometimes. And then I'm actually going to close with a little bit of a talk about the rim fire, because I think that's a really important thing for us to think about in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks and in the Sierra Nevada. It really was a watershed event. So there's a very emotional response that goes with wildland fire. And the obvious answers are is because, well, it's scary, right? And it can burn homes, people get evacuated, and there's a high elemental sort of reaction that goes with that. And it's horrible. I know if you've ever been evacuated, it's a terrifying experience. And I don't want to marginalize that, but I always wonder why we do this with fire more than other natural disasters. I grew up in Buffalo. Blizzards actually kill more people than any other natural disaster, but they tend to do it one person at a time, one case of hypothermia, one car accident. But they're really deadly, and no one ever talks about stopping the blizzards. Why do we have this belief that we can somehow manipulate this fire? And it's a very European-American association with evil and with the devil. And it really is a cultural bias that's very unique to the European mindset that we brought with us when we settled here. If you look at African culture, Chinese culture, the Native Americans, obviously, fire was just part of it. It was one of the forces. The phoenix and the flame transcends into every culture. We actually only stole it from Middle Eastern cultures. It doesn't have a long history in the European mindset. So it's really distorted things, though, and it's done it for a long time. This is a quote from an 1899 USGS report. Fire's effects were always evil, without a single redeeming feature. That might have set the stage a little wrong. What do you think? And to now, and then back to the rimfire, there's a PIO on the rimfire who kept on talking about the monster in the woods. I don't think we're doing ourselves favors, and it was quite the fire, don't get me wrong. And who hasn't seen the news clip where the firefighters are battling the wildfire? We have turned fire into a sort of warfare. And it's been going on for a long time. Our first leaders in this park, both Fry and White, who were our first civilian superintendents in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, were advocates of light burning, which kind of translates to what prescribed fire is now, but with less control. And the leaders of the National Park Service were aghast. Mather and Albright were very horrified. If it weren't for the reality that John White was very connected to this community and down into the valley and helped make this park happen, they would have probably fired him. They were very frustrated. But they argued hard that frequent fire would prevent big fires. A comment from 1904 from a forest supervisor: people of this region regard forest fires with careless indifference. The white man has come to think that fire is part of the forest and a beneficial part of that. And, you know, truthfully, the first forest chief, Gifford Pinchot, got fire ecology pretty well. When he visited Sequoia Groves in 1891, this is what he had to say: when the black marks of fire are sprinkled on the wonderfully deep, richer ochre of the bark, the effect is brilliant beyond words. He then talked to some settlers, he will relate, that told him they've been protecting those sequoias from fire by putting all the fires that started out. And he asked them, well, who's been protecting those sequoias for the last 4,000 years? So I think he got it pretty well. But then, unfortunately, 1910 happened, what's called the big blow up. It's still one of the largest fire seasons on record in America. This is in Montana and Idaho. 78 people were killed. It totally changed fire response with equipment and training and everything else. And he had an agency that was floundering on the point of dying, literally. Congress did not like the new Forest Service. And he made a promise. So this man who got it made the promise, I can put those fires out. and the war was on. This is one of those moments that always makes me really sad, because it really has more impact on what happened to us in American culture than I think we realize. And so the war was on. The 10 a.m. rule states that any fire that we saw out on the landscape, by the next day at 10 a.m. in the morning would be put out at 10 acres or less. And that meant smoke jumpers, that meant fire lookouts, that meant sending people way into the wilderness to try to catch fires that really weren't bothering anyone. And it also leads to a very aggressive prevention program. This is World War I era. This is all Forest Service. World War II, a little spooky. What do you think? Death rides the forest. This one is astounding. And then they started to realize that maybe they were scaring people, and they thought they'd try to get a warmer, fuzzier approach to fire prevention, not give people nightmares at night. They experimented for a while with Bambi, but then as we all know, the Forest Service settles on Smokey Bear. And he is arguably the most effective public relations icon the federal government has ever had. Everyone knows who Smokey is. But all this is really in conflict with that Native American perception of the sacred fire. They called it the thunderbird, most cultures called it the phoenix. They simply saw fire as something on the landscape or a force of rejuvenation. And again, who thinks we can wage war on a hurricane? Why have we been doing this to ourselves? And the results, as we know, are very dire. And I love this quote from 1898. Of the hundreds of persons who visit the Pacific Slope in California every summer to see the mountains, few see more than the immediate foreground in a haze of smoke, which even the strongest glass is unable to penetrate. By glass, they need binoculars, right? Different time. And this has always been a smoky place. There's always fire in the Sierra Nevada. But this is a slide that I teach to young PIOs and to firefighters as well, that we all know what we do on the landscape. If it's putting the fire out, if it's lighting the fire, if it's letting the fire go, if it's mechanical thinning, we do it for the right reasons. Community health, community protection, ecosystem resilience, whatever it is. We all do these for good reasons, but then if we don't think about the social and political implications and how people perceive that, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So I'm going to shift now to a little bit about, we are really inconsistent about how we message across the agencies. How many times do you hear the fire belongs in the Sierra Nevada like rain belongs in a rainforest? Actually, besides from all of you who've been listening to me for the last 6 years, how many of you really hear that a lot in your standard fire messaging? It really is a very different message. All these little blue highlights are things I traditionally talked about and how I represented fire in Sequoia Kings as a point of reference. But there's a good reason why we're inconsistent for sometimes. And I think my CAL FIRE friends and Tulare County friends will appreciate this. I've often was asked, why doesn't CAL FIRE do what you guys do? And I always thought that was a really crazy question, because CAL FIRE, by their mission, is responsible for protecting the lands that we all live in, which means they're protecting life and property in our homes. I'm not sure that's really where you want to manage fire on the landscape, right? So I think it's really important to think about what they're managing, why they're managing it, and where they're coming from. And that one's obvious. I want CAL FIRE to go and try to put out a fire near my home if they can safely do so. Please, thank you. But a lot of it's different landscapes, different missions, different leaderships, and different directions. And it's probably important to point those missions out. Most of you know the National Park Service mission here to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, to provide for the enjoyment of the same by such manner and such means that will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. It's a lovely one. This is the Forest Services. To sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands, to meet the needs of future and present and future generations. I always think about this in the sense of poetry and pragmatism. The Park Services is very poetic and beautiful. The Forest Service is a very pragmatic, hey, we can use this stuff as long as we protect it in the long term. And they're both vitally important. So as a rule, the NPS is kind of perceived as a conservation organization. We don't have the authority to log. That's an important distinction because we hear it a lot, and it defines how we can manipulate fuels. We have a lot more wilderness. Sequoia Kings are 97% wilderness. In Indian National Forest, we're about 50%, for example. And my locals will say that's too much wilderness. And when I mention what the parks have, their jaws drop and they think it's very amazing. But that means more wooey, less wooey, more wilderness, less wooey, and we have less types of uses. And I'll get into what I mean with uses by this. By definition, the Forest Service's mission is multiple use. Forests should provide commodities and services, be that water, water power, or in some cases in timber. So the thinning option is a much greater, they have a lot more parameters where they can work with that. They have less wilderness as a rule, and this isn't true across the landscape, but usually the parks hold the high ground. You think about Yosemite, Sequoia Kings, Yellowstone, but ringing them on the lower ground tend to be national forests, which are more complicated lands to manage. In some ways we have it easy. We're at the top of the mountain. We've got rock that fire can, stop at. They have this more mixed sort of fuel type. They have a lot more development in it, and they have more wooey. They have a lot more uses: OHV, off-road vehicles, hunting, grazing, mining, and all those things actually lead to a lot more human-caused fires. By the numbers, the Forest Service has significantly more human-caused fires than the National Park Service does. And that's important because I've always maintained that humans start fires in really dumb places. As a rule, 99% of fires are along a roadside, and along that roadside is probably life, property, and development. So suppression is going to be a stronger strategy for the obvious reasons. And if you think about all these big fires that happened this year, the Rim Fire, the fire that just happened in Southern California, escape campfires. Dispersed camping is really popular, but boy do people lose their fires when they disperse camp. There's alignment to a point. There's not a scientist who's a fire ecologist who will not agree that fire needs to be brought back in the landscape in the Sierra Nevada. The Forest Service has this dialogue session. It's called the Sierra Cascade Dialogue, and the last session happened to be on fire and fire resiliency. And their preeminent scientists and fire ecologists got up and said, we need to do more burning, more prescribed, more managed fire, more by lightning fires. Thinning is part of the problem, but by sheer numbers, thinning is not the only solution. We can't do it by thinning alone. So that's the Forest Service's scientific point of view, and I think everyone knows that the Park Service, the Tonys, and the Jan Van Weyden Downs clearly are in that position as well. But as a rule, Park Service has embraced fire as a natural process and has led the way a lot in prescribed and managed fire, and we like to kind of brag about that. Sequoia Kings is one of the leaders. As a rule, the Forest Service tends to be more cautious about managing fire at an agency level, as in the leadership above, not just even at the forest level, but also at the line officer forest supervisor level. Some of this has to do with the higher complexity of the fires they manage. Some of this has to do with the sheer sort of philosophy that goes with an agency. The multiple use agency is politically a more conservative point of view, and they tend to be a politically more conservative sort of agency, and those cautiousness goes with that. Having said that, any fire manager, any superintendent, any forest supervisor should be thinking about the standard things. This is what our policy says we should do. We should always think about life first, and that's firefighter and public safety. What's the risk? What's to be protected? Are there lives, property, homes, infrastructure out there? Do we have resources available? And then what our land management objectives are. That might depend. In the Forest Service, they have a lot more categories. They have some wilderness, but if they have a timber stand that's considered a commodity that needs protected because it's property, then that's going to change how they manage the fire on the landscape. Having said that, I think one of the things that we're all really trying to think about is what do we do about fire in the Sierra Nevada? And I said these two things are our sort of relationship with fire and these differences, because I want to shift to a surprising thing that I'm not with this park at all, but I have on their permission. Oh, I'm ahead of myself. So we do try to choose by the best outcomes available. And this lion fire, you guys remember this because it was pretty smoky. The Sequoia National Forest is probably your one outlier forest in Region 5, which is in the state of California, that manages fire quite a bit. So lucky you guys, the one outlier is also your neighbor. But they wanted this. As you can see, as a rule, very good fire effects on the landscape. And part of why they're so driven is because they had this, the McNally fire, which saw stand replacement and type conversion, and they're very concerned. So we try to pick the right fires for the right reasons. And this is when I shift to the rim fire. And I'm doing a lot of this on permission of both the Forest Service and the Park Service up there. The rim fire, the mega fire, has made it to the Sierra Nevada. That's not a good thing. And up to this point, it's been in Southern California. We've seen it in Arizona. We've seen it in Colorado. There's a sort of, I don't know, maybe smugness or maybe disbelief that it could happen here. But the rim fire burned almost 300,000 acres on Stanislaus and in Yosemite National Park. And I quote Stephen Pine, who's one of the sort of experts for the long term on the human relationship with fire. And after this fire season, in part because of Yarnall Hill and in part because of RIM, he did the RIM fire. He did an editorial where he stated every wildland fire put out becomes a fire put off. He then went on to say there's ample money and will for response when the crisis is at hand, but little for the patient labor of prevention, inoculations, and general wellness, period. And I picked this photo. First of all, Al Golub's a friend of mine. He's the only photographer I ever kicked off of the fire line, but that was for a good reason. And this is the entrance station at Hodgson Meadow in Yosemite National Park as the fire is coming into Yosemite.
Okay.
This is not what fire in the Sierra Nevada should look like. And it was really something that we had not seen before. And I'm using the slides that Gus Smith, who is a fire ecologist of Yosemite, put together. He makes the same point
Hey,
that...
Dave, can you go back to that previous one?
Yeah. This one?
Yeah. Is that the smoke there? Or?
That's just the smoke, and that you can see the burned footprint from aerial. That's how big it got.
That's taken from the moon. When
No,
Gus
I'm
was-
assuming that's just your standard MODIS sort of image. So it should be frequent. It should have looked like this. This is what we always kind of aim for. We got pictures of the sheep fire that looked this way, and it made us really happy. This is actually the grouse fire in Yosemite. But that's all in history. Because of all these things we've been talking about, how we interpret the policy, more people moving into the mountains because that's a wonderful, beautiful place to live, the fuels accumulations, the sources of ignitions. Again, rim fire was started by an escape campfire. They are still not getting to the prosecution stage because they're being really cautious. There's always competing resources. In August, there's never enough firefighters, at least not in the recent years. So there's always a fight over who's going to get what. And basically, you know, Gus wanted to make this point that the Forest Service, but contractors as well, make money off of fires and are dependent. A lot of the Forest Service budget is truly dependent on the firefighting funds that come in. So this response is this sort of self-perpetuating catch-22. And I would make the argument that the rim fire was the fire that was put off. And in fact, a brilliant woman named Deb Schweizer, well, she worked in Yosemite National Park, made a video called Best Intentions, in which we literally, if you go back and watch that video that was put out in 2006, we say if we're not careful, we're going to have this incredibly big fire. We said the rim fire was coming in 2006. I'm really sad we were wrong. We were right. And Yosemite had a pretty proactive fire management program. They had a period here, which I think is interesting to look at, in the 80s and 90s. They had a very, very cautious FMO, and they were pretty much a suppression park in those years. Having said that, their biggest fires come out of those years. The 1990 A-Rock fire. In the 80s too? Okay. Cherie says the 80s as well. 1990 A-Rock fire burns through the community of Foresta, high-intensity fire. The 1996 Ackerson complex was the biggest fire Yosemite saw at that point, at something around 86,000 acres. It's worth noting that the rim fire on its first day burned 11,000 acres in the park. In the first day it entered the park, let me clarify. So the table was set, the fuel loads were critically high, the fuel moistures were critically low, we had winds. It's the second year of a serious drought. This looks like it might be the third in a long-term drought pattern. And I'm going to go through these really quick because I think they're super telling. This is the fire as it starts. And they tried really hard to suppress it right in that canyon before it crossed the Tuolumne River drainage. They were not successful. If you see red, this is high intensity fire, think stand replacement. This is 3 days. This is 4 days. And almost 40,000 acres. This is what Yosemite saw coming from Crane Flat on that very day. And this is what happened the next. August 23rd, you've got almost another 20,000 acres of growth in a day, and it enters the park. Most of it is high severity fire. This is the final footprint, so I've just leaped forward quite a bit, just so you know. This is August 23rd, this is September 16th. As you can see though, that run, those 3 or 4 critical days were really important. One of the things that was really interesting is places that had burned hot before, places like the Big Meadow Scar that reburned in 2009 in the escape prescribed fire, burned really hot. We saw that in the Ackerson complex as well from 1996. When it reburned, this is a zoom in of this one of the top corners, but almost all of it was stand replacing. And again, this is just those days, August, I think I've got a laser pointer. Figure it out. Maybe not. These days right here are those 3 or 4 days. Most of that happens in 3 or 4 days. And here's the thing about Gus says it's preliminary. The fire ecologist, he's a little bit reluctant to say anything definitive until they do more studies. But about 33% high intensity fire went through Yosemite National Park, 80,000 acres, and about 33% high intensity. It's not really typical this year. There are pockets that burn hot. You should see high severity fire in places where you've got a slope that's really steep where the fuels get thick. But usually 10, 15, maybe even 20% would be more typical. This was a little bit much. Stanislaus saw about 40% high intensity fire. So they did not, in some ways you would think maybe because Yosemite had a very proactive program that maybe things would have been better. Gus was really clear on saying that sometimes all the treatment, all the fuels work, that couldn't provide enough inertia to stop the fire that was coming. But sometimes it did. And that's one of the things I want to highlight, and I do really wish I knew where my laser was. Anyway, we'll do without it. If you see these light, and I guess I'll come up here real quick for a second. These colors, these kind of purples, this sort of mauve, or the dark blues, which are not on the screen, these are treatments that had been done previously by Yosemite National Park. So either prescribed fire, managed fire, or a suppression fire. And what's important to see is it really did make a difference in help holding and containing that fire. It didn't always do it right away. Some of these areas like down below are old fire scars and it burned right through them. But what it also shows is it went from red to green. So the intensity of the fire that went through the area did get better. This is another example. This is Kibbe Ridge area. A lot of prescribed fire. That blue up top is prescribed fire. A lot of managed fire. There's this fire in 2004. I remember it was started by a gentleman who killed his family in the Bay Area, and we couldn't respond to it because he shot at our firefighters, which is a firefighter safety issue. So it never actually got fought. I remember that one really well. But those treatments did help slow the growth quite a bit. And I think this one is my favorite because Hodgson is one of those areas that was a really hot day. It was one of those big days when the fire was entering the park. And you can see there was a lot of treatment done. All this stuff up here were previous burns. And it burned through it. It didn't stop it. But it eventually got to other burns where we could stop it. And it did knock it down from high intensity to low intensity fire. So my key message here is it really does make a difference. It didn't make as much of a difference as maybe Yosemite wanted. They're pretty clear that they got a lot of pretty rough fire behavior out there. But it did eventually help people to hold and contain that fire. And it did get some favorable effects where they'd done that work. So I guess it's my one message that I know we all don't love the smoke, but it really does make a difference and it's really important. The other thing I really want to give a nod to Yosemite for, and there's a gentleman in the room who was part of this, Mr. Ben Jacobs. When they were getting this fire coming in to the park, They had some high valued resources in the Tuolumne Grove of giant sequoias and the Rockefeller Grove of sugar pine. Sugar pine, old growth sugar pine is almost gone in the Sierra Nevada. Actually, I think for Yosemite, that sugar pine grove is more important. And they inherited a fireball. You saw what was coming towards them. And they had to make a tough decision. Do we wait and see what happens, or do we try to get proactive and try to introduce fire the best way we can? And they went in and did fire operations in those groves. And it was really intense. It was drought, it was hot, it was windy. And Gus feels pretty strongly, he said about 30% mortality will probably be seen in both of those groves. The one irony is one of the things that's always been hard about bringing fire back to sugar pines is once the fuels accumulate, as that fire smolders slowly over time, it rings the cambium and kills the tree. It burned fast enough. He does not believe that that will be as much of a factor with this, but still seeing about 30% mortality. But I asked him as a point of reference, what do you think would have happened if he did nothing at all? And he said we might have lost it all. So it's a real nod to the courage for the folks who took that risk and tried to make the best out of a really bad situation. And I know this sounds really grim and I don't really want to be totally depressing, but I just think what happened with the rim fire in the Sierra Nevada this year is so important for us who live here, who are facing droughts. 2013 was the driest recorded year in California history. This was 2014, and although the rain and snow is here, yay, U.S. Hanford, Weather Service out of Hanford went into drought stage 4 today for extreme drought. They said it was nice, but it wasn't enough. So we need to think really hard about the fuels and the trees and the places we live and how we're going to manage them. And in these places that are wildlife parks and forests, we really need to be as proactive as we can because it does make a difference. And with that, I'll open it to questions. That was also at Crane Flat. Yay! No questions. Yeah.
I just want to say that without those fuel treatments at Yosemite, and I'm talking prescribed burning, we probably would not have been successful stopping that fire when we did.
Yeah.
There's no question. I've done enough burning in the Sierras to know that.
Yeah, for those of you who can't hear Ben, what he's saying is those prescribed treatments that were done in Yosemite, those edge burns that I was kind of showing you, most definitely did make a difference in helping contain and hold that fire. These areas here were crucial. Yeah.
I can see with the smoke, fire management. But what's being done about smoke?
What's being done about smoke management? Well, I'd love to say that I've always asked Ben if we could make a smokeless fire. I wouldn't have a job, but hey, you know, it's...
We're in the laboratory working on the clock.
I think one of these unfortunate realities is you can't do fire without smoke. We try to grab them the best way we can. When we're doing prescribed fire, we try to get good dispersal windows so the smoke lifts out and doesn't settle. But the reality is you cannot do it. This is one of the things we were just discussing with the Forest Service the other day is people want us to burn more. You need to burn more, but we need less smoke. You can't do it. If you're going to burn more, you're going to have more smoke. And the sad part is we've made it harder on ourselves because the fuels out there are so much thicker. The fires that are happening now are far smokier than anything that happened 100 years ago. There's sometimes 5-10 times the amount of fuel on the ground that's getting chewed up and consumed, and that creates a lot of smoke. So little fires can be extremely smoky just because of the amount of fuel that's on the ground. So the best answer I have is we try to do it the best way we can to not impact communities. But I think the other part of that is if you look at the rim fire, which was full suppression from the first minute it was detected, it made air hazardous in Reno, Nevada. People were being evacuated out from Reno, from all that corridor, Tahoe. People were literally leave this area now. It's not the first time, but it's one of the first times the community was evacuated for smoke and not fire. So one of the other answers is if we can do it in a measured approach, which means more frequent and there's a lot of smoke in the air, it's better than these extreme events that come that literally we're sending people to the hospital with respiratory distress.
Deb?
So even though there's a drought and it's really dry, is it still important to have prescribed burns?
When you can safely do so. So it's still important to do prescribed fires even though we're in a drought. One of the catches about prescribed fires is there's parameters that we have to do safely. It can't be too windy, it can't be too dry, and it can't be too hot. So we look at things like relative humidity and temperature. So those windows are shrinking. This is one of these things that's a sort of catch-22, is we probably need to do more prescribed fire instead of waiting for the rim fires or the aspen fires or the wallow fires. But the opportunities to safely do so are shrinking and shrinking. And actually on the Inyo National Forest today, we got rain as well, yay, and some snow. And my crews immediately went out and did pile burning. And people said, wait, it's a drought. It's a drought, but we got 5 inches of snow. And we get really short windows on the other side because of the rain shadow, but our crews went out and grabbed them. And we work a lot, same thing, we have to work with CAL FIRE, we have to work with our cooperators and make sure we're all in agreement and we can do this. But they went out and they actually did a broadcast burn today as well. So I think, yes, we have to grab it when we can.
I think it's important to note that with prescribed burning, it's a very much collaborative relationship with the air district, where they really we don't really control that window when it comes to air. We're regulated by the air district, and they give us approval based on the best available forecasting they have. And so when there's smoke in the air, it's not that the park's being negligent and disregarding, it's that we're working with the air district, and if the weather sometimes doesn't quite do what we want it to do, then we have smoke impacts. But a lot of times we can be burning throughout the park, and people down here would hardly know it.
Well, and here's an ironic perspective from the other side, now that I am with Inyo, is every time we burn, our air district thinks a favorable dispersion pattern is to send it to the east. If we got easterly flow, it's going to lift, it's going to disperse. Well, it always goes somewhere. And the east side communities are hearing this urgency. We need to do more on the west side where the fuels are really out of whack. And between the aspen fire this year and the rim fire, the east side got pretty hammered. And they don't want to hear that good dispersion to the east is a favorable burn condition. There's no way to do this without smoke. I wish I knew a way.
Well, also, I mean, the fact is we're going to be breathing smoke. And with the less we burn and allow fire to play its role, we're going to be breathing smoke for generations here. And so we're really working towards a future that we won't benefit from in this lifetime, but our grandchildren, if we continue burning, will definitely breathe cleaner air over the long run, but it takes that much time.
And I think I'll do one concluding thought, and then I don't want to hold everyone up, but one of the things we were doing in Sequoia Kings and Charisse was leading up when I was leaving was these alternative fire futures under the model of climate change. And we were talking about what would happen if we got certain sorts of drought conditions or fire events. And we forecast something that would have happened 50 years ago down the line, but it is the rim fire. It's here right now. So,
What about more thinning?
more mechanical thinning. So remember, national parks can't do a lot of it. We do, but it's small. It's less than 8 inches in diameter at base height is what we would say, something like that big, which really is the important fuel. Like a lot of people often get hung up on if we log more, we log more. But what really causes the smoke and creates the big fires is those little ladder fuels that carry the fire from the floor to the canopy and to the top. And when you look at those burnt out areas, if you go back to, let me go back a couple slides, a lot of slides I guess, to this, what's left standing is actually the big trees. The big trees are really not the problem. Everything else gets consumed along the way, but removing the ladder fuels is super important. So thinning's a huge part of it, absolutely. And again, in the forest, and you know, rim fire is really controversial for the Stanislaus right now because you've got certain folks are saying just take it all out right now, and other people saying, well, you need to leave some of it. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle, but it's gotten so politicized that it's really getting bogged down. I think logging is obviously part of the solution. But again, our scientists are saying by sheer numbers, we can't do it. We cannot log our way out of this fast enough or thin it.
So part of the problem with thinning is really good. It takes out the crown fire potential because you widen the spacing between trees. And so it does allow firefighters to have some defensible space to work with. But as far as an ecological, and Tony pipe in, you don't get that nutrient release.
You still got all that litter and duff on the ground, which is the biggest sources of fuel. So.
Thinning's a great way to reduce fire hazard. Absolutely.
Yeah, around communities
Yep.
especially.
Absolutely. I think we have to do it all. And I think when I say we, that also includes communities who really need to make themselves fire safe. They need to do their work around their homes to keep them clear of vegetation, make it, I mean, when we respond to your home, and I will speak for folks like CAL FIRE here, if there's a lot of fuel and there's a lot of vegetation, it's not safe for them. They're not going to be able to make a good stand at your home. So you have to take responsibility for what you do at your house as well. I have really good defensible space.
It's a selling point for your house.
Deborah, before you sit down,
Okay.
hold on a second.
We love you, Deb.
Aw,
Let's see, okay, we've got a certificate here from the chamber in appreciation for your service. And the county, the supervisors are sending another one.
Oh,
That one
nice.
has a nice frame.
Go good.
Oh, I gotta get your address before you go, so we'll know where to mail
Okay.
it when it comes in.
Okay.
Okay, and we always give one of these. If you ever need a place to stay when you're coming back and visiting us, you can stay with us.
A very generous business.
No problem. Thank you. And you know, every year, somebody makes an award, and it's different every year. We never know what we're gonna get. This one reminds me of like Mount Rushmore or something. Nice, look at that. See the three heads? It's like coming out of the oak. There we go.
Excellent. I would just say one other thing. I was very, very touched that Leah thought about me. I'm not what most people would consider a traditional firefighter. I don't as much go out there with the Pulaski and a hose, but it's very nice that you would consider me, so thank you.
You were so well informed, and you were always answering our questions. We were worried and scared, and you just always had answers. We just really appreciated you, Deborah.
Thank you.
And Chief Garcia, are you going to make this presentation?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Hold on just a second. We'll put your back on the camera. Make sure you're in the video camera.
Thank you.
Dad, we were outside.
I'm Joe Garcia, Tulare County Fire Chief. First of all, Deb, that was a very impressive presentation.
Thank you. Yes.
You know, we firefighters, we try to achieve the same goal, whether it's up in the National Forest, whether it's U.S. Forest Service, or whether it's your local fire department, and the goal is to save lives and property. Okay. We do it in different ways, whereas you do it through controlled burns, prescribed burns, land management, then we do it through building codes, fire protection systems such as sprinkler systems, and other means of achieving the same results. I'm really glad to be here tonight. Our recipient tonight is Jason Haas. Now, you may say, well, why is he using a cheat sheet here? It's realistic. In reality, our department has about 340 community firefighters, and then we have around 80 engine company officers that are comprised of lieutenants, captains, and battalion chiefs. So I do have a lot of staff and a lot of personnel. So consequently, we are here to recognize today firefighter Jason Haas. Jason is 37 years of age.
Yes.
Okay. Is married to his wife Julie, and two beautiful daughters, Abby and Autumn. Okay. Now, he originally was not a local. Back in 2005, he and his wife were up in Northern California pestering horses and trying to, shoe horses and had a horseshoeing business.
I did.
You did? Okay. And they were teaching high school as well up there. And they decided to head on down to God's country and head on down to Three Rivers, okay, to take over the management of the Lazy J Ranch Motel, a family business since 1974.
That's correct.
Okay. In his younger days, Jason had entered the fire service. However, he had a short stint in the fire service. Okay, he was young and just too full of energy, and he wanted to do other things and felt that he was not successful, and therefore he felt he didn't have the tact, the sense of responsibility, or the emotional maturity to stay in the fire service. So consequently, he gave it up and went on to live his life. Okay. However, after he moved on, he got married and he had a family, and he was living in Three Rivers managing the hotel. Captain Parrish, who's out there looking like the Lone Ranger, came into his business and was chatting with him, was talking to him about smoke detectors, this, that, the other, okay, and the fire department.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, he listened attentively, okay, as he had previously had a short stint in the fire service. But it really didn't come to light, and really the light bulb didn't come on until one day when a 500-gallon propane tank decided to blow its lid. Okay, and if you ever have been present when a compressed cylinder, gas cylinder, blows its lid, blows its top, it's quite impressive. I mean, it sounds like a railroad coming down, just coming down the road straight at you.
Very scary.
So this incident caused Jason to reflect again and think about the fire service, which he did. He then contacted Captain Parrish and said he was interested in signing up as a Tulare County Extra Health Firefighter. He immediately proceeded to do so, and he went through the 9-week training prior to being allowed to go out on his own, and given a pager and all the turnout gear and everything, and like everything that we're so proud of. So he got his gear and he got his pager. And after responding to several incidents, including multiple medical incidents, he realized that his medical training was inadequate. And when you're dealing with young firefighters and they have a sense to realize the weaknesses and to do something about that, that shows a high degree of maturity. Okay. So he immediately signed up at the Dinuba City EMT class, and for the next 5 months he was really, if you will, engulfed and totally involved in the EMT training, which is pretty extensive training, and completed the program to receive his EMT certificate. However, this did not go without sacrifice, okay? Because 5 months doing your job and going to school, why? That takes a toll on the family. So he did finish the training program, and without question, he has become an active and dependable firefighter and an asset not only to his engine company, but also to the Tulare County Fire Department. He's respected by his fellow firefighters, and as the chief, I commend him for his dedication and commitment to the department, his community, and the citizens of Tulare County. Jason, thank you for a job well done.
Thank you very much, Chief. Jason, you're going to tell us some stories? Can't sit down yet.
I'm not, excuse me for the nervousness, I'm not used to standing in front of a big crowd of people.
Oh, this
Nor
is
I have to
just
be in that
friends,
big
just
Right, right. So anyway, like Chief had mentioned, I did try to enter the service just a few years out of high school, and I wasn't emotionally ready to handle the situation. But the desire's always been there, and and this is when we moved to Three Rivers in 2005. Running a motel is a 7-day-a-week job. However, I can drop things if necessary and leave to go help. And the last few years, I've the desire to get back into the job has been there, and it's been nice. So I'm able to respond to most of the medical calls up here, the traffic, whatever it may be. I'm pretty much able to get a hold of it and leave at any point in time. So I'm very grateful to be part of the community, and I couldn't ask for any better lieutenants, captains, or chiefs. It's been I've met a lot of good people in the fire service, but it's also allowed me to meet a lot more people throughout the Three Rivers community. So I'm very grateful that I can help, and I'm very grateful to be here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now don't sit down. Let's sit down. Okay. Once again, we have a certificate from the chamber, and there's another one on the way in a very nice frame from the supervisors. Now, I know where you live, so I can just bring it to you.
Right, you know where I live.
Where was Deborah? Don't forget to give me your address before you leave. And I know you have the hotel.
Yes.
But let's say suppose you're full. It happens often.
It does.
And some relative comes last minute, you don't know where to put them, they didn't tell you they were coming, and you're full. You can bring them over here.
All right. Thank you very much. These come in handy.
You can't use those because that means I have to watch Autumn.
We'll talk about that.
Or you could just escape, yeah, just get away. Just to take you.
Okay.
And here's your Mount Rushmore.
Oh,
Here we go.
very nice.
Nice local oak.
Thank you very much.
For letting me do all that. That was tough. Thank you. All right, everybody. Have fun. Eat up, visit.